We're going to go on a whirlwind tour of professional growth, and we'll start here with create and evaluate goals for student learning and professional growth. And this is definitely the densest one in here because it was deliberately created so that it could be either a formal or informal process depending on what the teacher needed. And there is some duplication because of that. So initially in building knowledge, the whole purpose of this whole section really is that by the end, they still haven't written a formal goal of any sort, but that they've gotten their ideas out there. We begin with a pretty simple opening, which uses a terrific article from Harvard about setting goals. Some teachers who are veterans might react negatively to this basic article, in which case it does show up later. It's a really great article, though, that talks about the meaning and purpose for educators of goal setting. It helps create a backdrop for the next steps. Once teachers are given that chance to get an idea of what goals are, they're introduced to the idea of what is a SMART goal. And the reason we started with SMART goals and kept it that narrow was that even if the teacher's not going to write a SMART goal, understanding what SMART goals are really helps them to develop good, meaningful goals. So this is an opportunity to introduce SMART goals and see an example of what one looks like, and trying to write one just for students, not for themselves professionally, very basic. And again, if the teacher is really flummoxed or challenged from this by this SMART goals system, they can always use a more basic goal setting template, and you can use some of these questions to help them narrow their thinking. In testing goal setting, we're not, again, testing anything that is formal. We are still playing with that first idea that we're just getting an idea out there. So if you wanted to jump right into a more formal goal setting process, this first section, this background section, might be something you would skip over unless you think that there's pieces in here that you would need to review. So here we are. We've got those questions again. It's slightly different format so that you have an opportunity to help that teacher be prepared to narrow their thinking. It does take a little bit of a tangent into evidence because this is sometimes something that worries teachers. We all know that evidence is something that is generated in the course of authentic testing of a goal. So there is actually not a high stakes element to it, but often teachers forget this. And so this PowerPoint Standard for Success does have a comprehensive list of evidence. It's a big PowerPoint. It's got a lot of stuff in it, but it does such a good job of listing all the different types of evidence. It's really helpful. Before we go on to writing formal goals, it is important to know the different types of educator goals. So this section does not have a test, but has a background and create section. So as teachers go into getting an idea of these two different types, I felt it would be really helpful if they saw examples. These examples are both really great documents because they have more than one example for different types of teachers. And it helps, I think, frame an understanding rather than having a teacher try and write one initially. If they look at somebody else's, they're in a good place to start. It also looks at suggests the strategy browser. Sometimes this might help get them to think in terms of what's next. If they're worried about, oh gosh, if I pick this growth goal, how do I get there? Um, and then when we go to the create section, the teacher's reminded of something that's really, really important, and this was going to show up again and again, which is that it's important to make sure you know if your district and your school have goals, because if they do, then you are going to be constrained in some way to building on or meeting or underpinning those goals. So it's important to check in on whether or not those exist. And then again, I take a tangent here because I've found that this is an area of weakness for teachers, that they rush into goal setting and then realize they have no way to really measure. So we take a moment to step aside and ask about the tracking system that they might have and give them a chance to make some tweaks. And there's this helpful document that is very short and talks about evaluating and tracking student performance. We use that SMART goals example and template yet again, which has shown up earlier. Even though it's really quite lengthy, it does, it's it's sectioned by types of teachers, and it helps frame the questions and think in terms of really solid actions, so that it breaks the aspect of applying goals into really doable steps. I think it also shows how student and professional goals tie together as well. So again, there's no test section for this one because we're going to move on then into actually creating those goals. And so there's more than one background knowledge section for creating, because there's a more formal SMART goals section, and then there's the more informal, so that you have a bit of a choice. Again, the reminder of whether or not there's one in the district. Um, this is the one that goes with the more formal setting of goals that districts expect for teacher evaluation. So there's those examples of goals that were mentioned earlier that help frame a teacher's thinking. I also think that gives them a lot of confidence in trying to create their own. The part two piece is more of the informal talks. That's that article again that I mentioned earlier. It talks about what goals are. It talks about what makes a goal SMART, which help the teacher to focus more closely on, how do I make this an accountable, meaningful, narrow enough but not too narrow goal. Here's where all of this finally comes to fruition. And again, there's some repetition here because I think it's really helpful to see examples. These are all repetitions of documents seen earlier, but with some new questions, which is these two big overarching questions about what goals mean in the long term. Do they make a change that endures? And what would a student's mastery of a goal look like? So this is the time the teacher has created finally their goals, and here's an opportunity to test them prior to them actually being put into place. Some things that you have seen earlier, checking in to see how, what it means. In other words, having it rooted in something real. What is it going to change? How do you know it's made a change? Again, reminding about evidence and having that PowerPoint that helps identify types of evidence. And here's where we introduce this opportunity to test it in a very safe way using the pre-mortem protocol, which is one of our student-facing protocols, a great way to take that post-mortem, which is, well, it's too late, but here's what went wrong, and make it into, we haven't done it yet, what could possibly go wrong? Then the implementation piece. The scenarios are really a terrific document. I'm so glad I found it because it really creates nice narratives that talk about what it means in action. And I think this is the type of document that might help a teacher project their implementation. And then the reminder that they have to be gathering all this information. Now, we do have another section because evaluating goals is something that should be ongoing. It's not something, you don't wait until the goal is complete and say, oh, geez, we didn't make it. Evaluation of goals is an ongoing part of SMART goals. And so this section is meant to be concurrent with the actual implementation of goal setting. It introduces first the types of protocols that you can use. One is more organized towards a formal process, and one is more something that you could do as a personal process. This helps you have a system approach to looking at your goals rather than kind of like a scattergun approach. Once the protocols have been examined, a teacher can make a decision on how they feel they are going to check in on their goals. And this is intended to guide them to make this their system, because it doesn't necessarily have to follow a specific protocol, but it's important that um, they have a timely check-in, that when they do that check-in, they're focusing on one thing at a time, that they're gathering evidence so that they can make meaningful decisions. And there's these checklists that also help you assess progress. These checklists are very bucketed by what type of goal, and they are aligned to the teacher evaluation system. And then in closing, this is where the coach in particular can make a real difference in the conversation. This might actually be a longer meeting or two meetings, because when you are regularly checking in on the data, that's probably going to stay with the create stage. This might be more about reaching close to the end. You'd have to decide, but this is more like a closure step. There's a protocol for looking at data. There's the self-assessment checklist. And then there's these questions, which are really truly the whole reason that the student and the teacher have gone on this goal-driven process.